Have you ever wondered what happens to a dream once it vanishes into thin air? What about a celebrity? Someone whose face you recognize, someone you've watched on your screen, whose voice you've heard in your ear, and then, just like that, they disappear. Gone without a trace. No goodbye, no explanation, no answers.
Just gone.
But what if I told you this wasn't just a random occurrence? What if this is part of a far bigger, more chilling mystery that has been unfolding for years, with patterns emerging and secrets buried beneath layers of fame, fortune, and the dark side of the entertainment industry? Tonight, you're going to hear a story that'll shake you to your core, one that will make you question everything you know about the world of stardom. This is the story of the vanishing stars, and we're going to dive deep into the truth behind it. But let me warn you, the truth is far darker than you can imagine. Imagine this. One moment they're everywhere. They're on billboards, on TV, in the movies, and suddenly they're gone. Not just out of the public eye, but gone in a way that leaves no trace behind. No scandals, no public meltdowns, no big controversies, just a quiet disappearance. And it's not just one star, it's many. The list goes on and on. Famous actors, beloved musicians, influencers who once held our attention, disappearing in a way that seems too orchestrated to be a coincidence. So many names, so many faces, and no answers. It's not just the celebrities, though. It's their fans, their families, their followers, all left searching, all left wondering. Where did they go? What happened? And why does nobody seem to know the answer? The media, the tabloids, they all go silent. Rumors start to swirl, but the truth remains elusive. Right now, you might be asking yourself, why should I care? They're celebrities. They've lived their lives in the spotlight, and maybe they just want some peace. I get that. But this story isn't just about stars on a screen. It's about the power that fame and influence can hold, about how a person can vanish when they hold too much of that power, and about the people who work tirelessly to keep their disappearance hidden. Something far more sinister is at play here. These are not ordinary disappearances. They are deliberate, calculated, and darkly connected. And that's what makes this story so important. It's not just about the stars who vanish. It's about the forces that have the power to make them disappear. Forces that we don't always see. Forces that we don't fully understand. And most terrifying of all, forces that seem to have the power to wipe out even the brightest of stars without a trace. So, why are we so invested in this mystery? Why can't we stop searching for the answers? It's not just because we love a good conspiracy. It's because each one of us is drawn to the idea that there's something lurking just beneath the surface of the world we live in, something we can't see, but can sense. We are drawn to the unknown, to the feeling that the world we live in may not be as it seems. Every time we hear about another star vanishing, there's a part of us that knows something bigger is at work. And that's why you're here with me tonight. Because deep down, you know there's more to this story than just the disappearances themselves. You want the truth. You want to understand what really happens when the lights go out, when the cameras stop rolling, and when the glitter fades away. You want to know what happens to the people behind the stars, the people whose stories we never hear, whose faces we never see, but whose fates are forever tied to the ones we idolize. And let me tell you, you're not alone in this search. Tonight, you're going to get the answers you've been craving. You'll uncover the secrets that no one dares to speak of, and you'll understand why these stars are disappearing in the first place. Now, I know it's easy to dismiss this as just another conspiracy theory, just another story of famous people getting caught up in the chaos of their own lives. But stay with me, because you're about to hear about something far more chilling than any rumor you've heard before. What you're about to hear is the story of people who went missing under circumstances that don't add up, people whose disappearances were not accidents, whose absence was planned. And in this twisted web, one name keeps coming up: the Shadow Network. At first, it was just whispers, rumors in dark corners of the internet. But the more we dug, the more connections, the deeper we dig into the world of vanished stars, the more complicated and unsettling things become. Let's take a step back for a moment and focus on one star in particular, someone whose disappearance has left a trail of confusion, suspicion, and unanswered questions. Meet Lucas Graves. once one of Hollywood's brightest young actors, known for his charisma and undeniable talent. Lucas had it all. He was the face on every magazine cover, the name that everyone recognized, the actor who seemed destined to be a household name for years to come. But what people didn't know was that his rise to fame had come with a price. Behind the flashy smiles and red carpet appearances, Lucas had been living in a constant state of pressure from his management team, from the public, from the media, and, most disturbingly, from himself. He was a young man who had been thrust into the spotlight too quickly, with too much attention and too many expectations. But despite the facade of success, something was off. People close to Lucas, like his longtime friend and publicist, Claire Reynolds, began to notice subtle changes in his behavior. At first, it was small things. He became more withdrawn, avoided social gatherings, seemed agitated in interviews. Then things started to get darker. He began pulling away from those who cared about him most, even those who had helped him get to where he was. It wasn't just the usual pressures of fame. It felt like something was eating away at him from the inside, something that was taking its toll on his relationships and his career. Around the same time, there were whispers of strange encounters Lucas had been having with a shadowy group of industry insiders. People who worked behind the scenes in ways most people never see. Some called them the gatekeepers, while others whispered about their more sinister nickname, the architects. They were the ones who controlled not just the stars, but the trajectory of their lives, their careers, and even their destinies. Lucas had been seen with them on several occasions, late-night meetings in upscale restaurants, secluded hotels, and private offices that no one could seem to get into. He'd brush it off, dismissing the rumors with a half-hearted laugh, but those who knew him best started to worry. Was he being pulled into something he couldn't get out of? Was he getting too close to the darker side of the industry? These were questions that no one had the courage to ask until it was too late. And then came the mysterious phone call that Lucas received just days before he vanished. It was a call that he'd never talk about. No one knew who it was from, and no one knew what was said. But after that call, his behavior shifted drastically. Lucas became even more isolated, disappearing for days at a time, refusing to answer his phone, and turning down offers for lucrative film roles. People began to speculate. Had he finally snapped under the pressure? Was he spiraling into a deep depression? Some even suggested that he'd planned his own disappearance, deciding that the weight of his fame was simply too much to bear. But that didn't explain everything. It didn't explain why, after Lucas's last public appearance, a tense and awkward interview with a major talk show, he had disappeared without a trace, leaving no clues behind. At first, the media tried to cover it up, spinning wild rumors of a personal breakdown, a drug problem, and a mental health crisis. But none of these explanations fit. If Lucas had gone into hiding, he had done it with a meticulous plan, and he had done it alone. No friends, no family members, no publicist. And most unsettling of all, there were no signs of a struggle. No goodbye notes, no social media posts, nothing. Just an empty hotel room, the door slightly ajar, and his personal belongings left untouched. But what if the truth was more complicated than anyone imagined? What if Lucas Graves hadn't just vanished for personal reasons? What if he had become entangled in something far more dangerous, something that had been lurking in the background of Hollywood for years? As investigators started to piece together the timeline of his last days, a pattern began to emerge, one that pointed to several strange connections that would lead them down a path of deception, manipulation, and conspiracy. And that's where the red herrings start to come into play. There were several people who seemed to have a motive to see Lucas disappear. Claire, his publicist, had been very vocal in the past about how she believed Lucas needed to slow down, take a break, get away from the spotlight for a while. Was it possible that she had known something was wrong and had been trying to protect him, or was there more to her involvement than met the eye? Then, there was the shadowy figure known only as Talon, a producer who had been involved in several of Lucas's films, but whose influence over him seemed to go beyond just business. Talon was notorious for getting what he wanted, and people had whispered that he wasn't afraid to use extreme measures to make sure the stars aligned in his favor. Could he have played a part in Lucas's disappearance? Was he trying to make Lucas comply with something he didn't want to do? And let's not forget the mysterious group known as the Architects. As the investigation deepened, the connections between Lucas's final days and this elusive organization started to unravel. Who were they? And more importantly, what did they want with Lucas? Theories began to emerge that the Architects weren't just pulling strings behind the scenes of the entertainment world. They were also involved in high-stakes manipulation of the public eye, guiding careers, directing outcomes, and ensuring that certain stars stayed in the spotlight while others were quietly removed. Lucas, with all his promise and rising stardom, had become a pawn in their game, and they weren't about to let him go without ensuring their hold over him. But here's where it gets even more chilling. As investigators dug deeper into Lucas's past, they uncovered something that no one had expected: an old diary hidden in the back of a forgotten drawer, where Lucas had written about his growing fear of the people around him. He'd spoken of cryptic encounters, whispered threats, and the overwhelming sensation that he was being watched. Was he paranoid, or was there truth to these fears? Was someone really hunting him, or was it all part of a larger plan to break him down mentally, to make him question reality until he'd vanish into the night, never to be seen again? By now, you can probably feel the tension building, can't you? There are so many moving parts to this mystery, so many people who could have been involved, and so many unanswered questions. You're beginning to see how this story is far more complex than just a simple disappearance, and the more we uncover, the more we start to realize just how deep this rabbit hole goes. But before we get any closer to the truth, there's one thing you need to know. There are forces at play that are far more powerful than any individual. And when these forces are in motion, there's no turning back. We've only scratched the surface, and the real story is darker, more twisted, and more dangerous than you can possibly imagine. Stay with me, because the truth is coming. But it's not going to be what you expect. It never is. Just when it seemed like the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, a new, unexpected obstacle emerged that would make it nearly impossible to uncover the truth. It was a crucial moment. Investigators were finally closing in on a potential lead that could have connected Lucas's disappearance to the Architects, the mysterious group that seemed to have manipulated his life from the shadows. The breakthrough came in the form of an old, encrypted message hidden in one of Lucas's personal devices, a message that appeared to contain the key to understanding why he vanished. It was strange, cryptic, and full of fragmented details, but it seemed like the kind of message that could unravel everything. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the device went missing. Gone. Without a trace. No sign of forced entry, no break-in. The room where the device had been stored was locked, and everyone involved in the investigation was accounted for. Yet somehow, the evidence had vanished into thin air. The timing couldn't have been worse. The investigators were left scrambling, unsure of where to turn next. Were they being watched? Was someone actively sabotaging their efforts to uncover the truth? It was starting to feel like someone or something didn't want the secrets of Lucas's disappearance to see the light of day. And it wasn't just the device. There were whispers that people close to the case were being warned off. There were reports of strange phone calls late at night, of people being told to stop asking questions, of cryptic threats whispered in dark alleys. No one knew who was behind these warnings, but they were effective. Slowly, those closest to the investigation began to back off, retreating into the shadows, afraid of what might happen if they went too deep. Claire, Lucas's former publicist, and one of the few people who might have known the actor's deepest fears, became more distant and evasive. When asked about her interactions with Lucas in the days leading up to his disappearance, she grew defensive, her usual calm demeanor replaced by an unnerving coldness. It was almost as though she was hiding something she wasn't willing to share. But the more the investigators pressed, the more they realized that Claire wasn't the only one with something to hide. A key ally in the case, someone who had seemed trustworthy and knowledgeable, started behaving strangely. Talon, the producer who had been involved in many of Lucas's films, had been surprisingly cooperative with the investigation at first. He'd given interviews, answered questions, even offered vague insights into Lucas's recent behavior. But now he was suddenly elusive. Calls went unanswered. Emails were ignored. And when he did make an appearance, it was as though he was trying to divert attention away from any real answers. One investigator, desperate to make a breakthrough, had tracked him down to a secluded estate on the outskirts of the city, hoping for some kind of breakthrough. But when they arrived, what they found was far from reassuring. The estate was empty. The gates were locked. The lights were off. And a thick, unsettling silence hung in the air. But that wasn't all. As they stood outside the gate, a car slowly pulled up, and for a brief moment, the investigator caught sight of a familiar face, one they had never expected to see there. It was Claire, the publicist. She had arrived at Talon's estate in the dead of night, and she wasn't alone. Someone else was with her, someone whose face the investigator couldn't quite make out. It was a brief glimpse, but enough to raise the hairs on the back of their neck. What was she doing here? Why was she working with Talon? Were they hiding something together, something that could shed light on what had really happened to Lucas? The investigator needed answers, but with every passing moment, the web of deception seemed to tighten around them. Every lead, every clue they uncovered, seemed to lead them further down a path of uncertainty and doubt. Was Talon involved in Lucas's disappearance, or was there someone even more dangerous pulling the strings behind the scenes? But just as things seemed to spiral out of control, the investigation took another strange turn. A piece of information came to light, a secret event from Lucas's past, one that had been buried for years. It was an event that no one had ever spoken of, an event that had been swept under the rug by those who wanted to protect the carefully curated image of Lucas Graves. But now, in the heat of the investigation, it was suddenly surfacing, like a ghost from the past. Lucas had been involved in a major scandal years before his rise to fame, one that had the potential to ruin his career. It was an affair, but not just any affair. It was a dangerous, illicit relationship with someone in a position of power, someone who had the ability to destroy careers and silence anyone who got in the way. The details of this affair were murky, hidden under layers of secrecy and manipulation, but it was clear that the person involved had a hold over Lucas, a hold that could explain much of his behavior in the months leading up to his disappearance. But what was the nature of this hold? Had the affair been a one-time mistake, or was it part of a larger web of control that had been pulling at Lucas from all sides? As investigators dug deeper into this past scandal, they realized that the pieces of Lucas's life were more fragmented than they had ever imagined. The connections between his personal relationships, his career, and the powerful figures who controlled the entertainment world were becoming clearer, but just as dangerous. What had seemed like a simple disappearance was now looking more and more like a carefully orchestrated removal, one that had been planned long before Lucas ever walked away from the limelight. But there was a twist, a new piece of information that no one had anticipated. Someone close to Lucas had been actively helping him cover up this scandal, someone who had been working behind the scenes to protect him from the fallout. But who was it? And why had they waited until now to reveal their involvement? The questions were piling up, the stakes growing higher by the day. Whoever was behind Lucas's disappearance, they were getting closer to the truth, and so was the investigation. But as the tension reached its breaking point, a phone call came in, and everything changed once again. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, as it whispered a warning. Stop looking for Lucas Graves. Some secrets are better left buried. The line went dead. And just like that, the investigation was thrown into chaos. Just when it seemed like the investigation couldn't get any more complicated, a new, unexpected twist sent shockwaves through the entire team. It came in the form of a mysterious message that was eerily similar to the one received by the investigator earlier. This time, it wasn't directed at the investigators themselves, but to someone far closer to Lucas, his younger brother, Ethan. Ethan had been quietly keeping to the sidelines, trying to distance himself from the growing storm surrounding his brother's disappearance. Despite being the sibling of one of the most famous actors in Hollywood, Ethan had always preferred a life outside the spotlight. But his world was about to be rocked in ways he never could have predicted. The message was brief, but its impact was immediate. Stay out of this. There are things you don't want to know. The chilling words came with a photo, an old, faded image of Lucas as a child, standing next to someone Ethan had never seen before. The stranger in the photo had a look in their eyes that could only be described as unsettling. It was almost as if they shared some unspoken connection, something that neither Lucas nor Ethan had ever mentioned in their family's history. The timing of the message couldn't have been worse. Ethan had just begun asking questions of his own. He had reached out to old family friends and even tried to track down people from Lucas's early days in Hollywood. Something about his brother's sudden disappearance didn't sit right with him, and the more he uncovered, the deeper he was drawn into a labyrinth of secrets, lies, and betrayal. And now this. Ethan was left with more questions than ever before, all leading back to that cryptic photo and the stranger lurking in the background. It seemed impossible, yet the message was undeniable. Someone with a deep, hidden connection to Lucas, was trying to warn him off, and in doing so, had pulled Ethan into a web of deceit that now seemed inescapable. The stakes had just been raised, and Ethan's involvement in this investigation was no longer a matter of curiosity. It had become a matter of survival. But there was more, so much more. As the days passed, a series of strange, seemingly unrelated events began to pile up, events that made it harder for anyone to trust anything they had previously believed. The investigators had been poring over the data they had gathered from Lucas's financial records, hoping to find a thread, anything that could lead them to his whereabouts or offer some insight into the forces at play. And then, like a thunderclap in the dead of night, a piece of information emerged that threw everything into chaos. A large, anonymous donation had been made to Lucas's charity just days before his disappearance. It wasn't the size of the donation that was strange. It was the recipient. The money had been funneled to a secretive, underground organization, one that had long been associated with high-profile figures in Hollywood, including people with a reputation for using their influence to control the industry behind the scenes. The donation was traced back to a complex network of shell companies, all of which seemed to have been set up for the express purpose of masking the true identity of the donor. Who was behind this? And why would Lucas have been involved with such a dangerous organization, one whose reach extended far beyond the public eye? This new revelation cast a shadow over everything the investigators thought they knew. Was Lucas's disappearance a result of his own involvement in this shadowy world, or had someone in this network orchestrated it all to keep him from revealing something far more explosive? To make matters worse, a conversation between two of the main investigators, off the record and unbeknownst to anyone else, revealed a troubling secret. They had uncovered something startling, a hidden relationship between Claire, Lucas's publicist, and a powerful media mogul who had long been rumored to have a hand in controlling the narrative around Hollywood's brightest stars. This mogul, whose name had only been whispered in hushed tones, was known for creating stars and destroying them just as easily. Claire's involvement with him wasn't public knowledge, but now it was clear that there was more to her motivations than anyone had realized. Had she been working in the shadows to protect Lucas, or to silence him? Was she an ally, or was she playing a much more dangerous game, one in which Lucas had become expendable? As if that wasn't enough, a new clue surfaced that caused the investigators to second-guess everything they thought they knew. A journal, found hidden in the back of a storage unit Lucas had rented years ago, contained a series of entries that seemed to be written in a state of panic. The journal chronicled Lucas's increasing paranoia about being watched, about people following him, about strange occurrences that made him question everything around him. But buried deep within the pages, there was something even more disturbing, a warning. Lucas had written about a person, a mysterious figure, who seemed to be pulling the strings in his life without him even knowing. This person, whom Lucas had described as the Watcher, was someone Lucas believed was responsible for manipulating events in his life to such an extent that he felt like a puppet on a string. The journal hinted at a hidden betrayal, a betrayal so deeply rooted in Lucas's past that it had taken years for him to even realize it. But who was the Watcher? And what did they want from Lucas? Had they orchestrated his disappearance to keep some dark secret buried forever? The investigators were no closer to answers, but the journal raised more questions than it answered, complicating the mystery even further. And then, just when it seemed that the web was beginning to unravel, an unexpected visitor arrived at the scene, someone who had been waiting in the wings, biding their time, ready to make their move when the moment was right. It was Lucas's old manager, a man named Mark Donovan, who had largely stayed out of the public eye since Lucas's rise to fame. Mark had been the one to sign Lucas to his first big contract, the one who had nurtured his career from the ground up. But what was Mark doing here now, after all this time? Was he here to offer new information, or was there something darker at play? Mark's arrival raised even more questions, questions that no one had the answers to. Was he here to help, or was he just another part of the puzzle, someone whose true motivations remained hidden beneath layers of deceit? With the investigation now spiraling in multiple directions, no one knew who to trust, and the once clear lines between ally and enemy were starting to blur. Everyone had their secrets, and it was becoming increasingly impossible to tell who was truly on the side of truth and justice, and who was just trying to protect their own interests. As the investigation continued, one thing became undeniable. The truth about what happened to Lucas Graves was far more complicated, far more dangerous than anyone could have ever imagined. And with each passing day, the stakes grew higher. Someone, or something, was determined to make sure that Lucas's secrets remained buried forever. The tension in the air had become unbearable. Every door creaked, every car passing by seemed to hold an unspoken warning, and every face in the crowd carried a subtle but unnerving stare. Lucas's investigation had already taken its toll, on his mind, on his relationships, and on his sense of security. But now it was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about survival. The deeper Lucas dug into the mystery, the more he began to feel like a pawn in a game that was far bigger, far darker than he had ever anticipated. And with every new discovery, the walls seemed to close in around him. The first sign of trouble came late one evening as Lucas was driving back from a meeting with one of his sources, a woman who had once worked with the organization Lucas had uncovered. She had promised to meet him again to discuss the details of what she knew, things that could unravel the entire web of lies he had been investigating. But as he turned onto the quiet street leading to his apartment, he noticed something strange. A car had been parked a few blocks away for hours, its headlights faintly illuminating the street corner. It was the same car he had seen earlier that day in the parking lot of a diner where he had grabbed coffee. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence. But as he pulled into his parking space, the car didn't drive away. It stayed there, watching, waiting. His heart rate quickened, and a cold sweat broke out on his neck. The unsettling feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was like an invisible presence was constantly lurking just out of sight, never fully revealing itself but always there, just beyond the edges of his awareness. Trying to shake off the growing paranoia, Lucas took a deep breath, locking his car doors as he stepped out into the quiet night. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling his attention away from the car. It was a message from Ethan. "I think they're on to me. I've been getting weird calls. Don't know who they're from." His pulse raced. Lucas tried to ignore the fear creeping up his spine, but it was becoming harder to breathe, harder to think clearly. What was going on? Was his brother in danger too? With every step toward his apartment door, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He couldn't help but feel like a target, a piece in a much larger puzzle, one that he didn't fully understand. When he entered the apartment, he was greeted by an unexpected silence, a silence that felt too heavy, too oppressive. The dim light from the hallway barely penetrated the darkness of his living room, and for a moment, Lucas stood there, frozen, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was inside, watching him from the shadows. But there was no one. Nothing seemed out of place. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Later that night, just as he began to settle in, a knock echoed through the hallway. Soft at first, barely perceptible, but it was there, unmistakable. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? He moved cautiously to the door, his hand hovering over the handle. The knock came again, louder this time, and he froze. It wasn't just a knock, it was a warning. Lucas knew it, deep down, but the door was still locked. No one could get in without his consent. He peeked through the peephole. There was no one in sight. Only the empty hallway stretched before him, illuminated by a single, flickering light. His phone buzzed again, and for a split second, he almost didn't want to answer. But he did. It was a voicemail. Listening to the message left him in a cold, terrified stupor. "You're digging too deep, Lucas.
Stop now."
There's nothing left for you to find." The voice on the other end of the line was distorted, but it was unmistakable. It sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't a voice of an unknown threat. It was someone familiar, someone he thought he could trust. It was Claire. Her warning, so urgent and yet so detached, made it clear. She knew more than she had let on. She knew the danger he was in, and she was trying to distance herself before it was too late. Before he could process the message, the next shock hit. He received an alert from his security system. Someone had tampered with the cameras outside his building. The footage showed a shadowy figure slipping into the alley near his apartment, vanishing from view as if they were never there to begin with. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He was being hunted. It was no longer a matter of solving a mystery. It was a matter of escaping with his life. The paranoia gnawed at him, taking root in his mind. Was it Claire? Was it Mark? Or was someone even more dangerous manipulating them all, pulling the strings from a place so hidden, so far out of reach, that no one could even begin to understand the true depth of their power? As Lucas tried to regain control, a series of frantic text messages flooded his phone. Ethan had gone silent. No reply to the messages. No calls. A sudden, urgent need to find his brother gripped Lucas. He had to find out what had happened to him, had to make sure that Ethan was safe, if he even could be. But as Lucas moved to leave his apartment, he noticed something chilling. His front door had been unlocked. The lock was turned, the door slightly ajar, as though someone had entered. Or perhaps it was left open intentionally, inviting him into the unknown. But there was no time to waste, no time to think. His brother was in danger, and with each passing second, the darkness that surrounded Lucas seemed to grow. Someone was always a step ahead, and whoever was behind all of this was more than just a shadow. They were becoming a living nightmare. Racing down the hallway, Lucas had only one thought on his mind: find Ethan, and find him before it was too late. But with every corner he turned, with every empty alley he ran past, the reality set in. The closer he got to the truth, the closer he came to understanding who was really pulling the strings, the more he realized that the line between ally and enemy had blurred. And now, there was no turning back. The game had changed, and in this high-stakes battle for survival, there would be no winners, only victims. Just as Lucas was about to confront the growing sense of danger, something happened that shook him to his core, something that made him question everything he thought he knew. He had been running on instinct for days, piecing together fragments of a story that didn't seem to fit, but now, as he rushed to find Ethan, he stumbled across a truth so unexpected that it stopped him dead in his tracks. The search for answers had led him down a dark path, one where every new discovery felt like another layer being peeled back from a deeply buried secret. But it wasn't the secrets of the mysterious figures in his life that shook him. It was the realization that he had been manipulated all along. It started with a simple text message, something that had seemed insignificant at first. He had been checking his phone on the move, his mind racing through countless scenarios, when he saw the notification. It was from Claire. He had grown used to hearing from her intermittently, always with information that somehow pushed him closer to the truth. But this message was different. It wasn't a warning or a cryptic piece of information about the investigation. It was a photo, a grainy shot of what appeared to be Ethan, looking almost unrecognizable. His brother was standing outside of an old, rundown building, a place Lucas recognized from a conversation they had had earlier. But what stood out wasn't the photo itself, it was the timestamp. It was from 2 days ago. Ethan had been alive, and the timing made Lucas's heart race with a growing dread. Ethan had been following him, watching him.
But why?
The shock of the photo hit Lucas hard, but there was something else. The moment he clicked on the image to zoom in, the background of the shot revealed a familiar face, one that he thought he had left behind. There, standing just behind Ethan, was Mark, his former colleague, the man who had helped Lucas in his early days of the investigation, the person he had trusted most in this twisted game. But now, Mark's presence in the photo felt like a betrayal on a level Lucas hadn't anticipated. He had been working with Ethan all along, and for a moment, the weight of that realization knocked the breath out of him. What was Mark doing with Ethan? And why had he kept his involvement hidden? Lucas immediately called Claire, desperate for answers, but it was as if she had anticipated his call. Her voice, strained and distant, told him everything he feared. "Lucas, it's time to wake up. You've been looking in the wrong places." Her words sent a chill down his spine. She wasn't just advising him anymore. She wasn't just trying to warn him. Claire knew more than she had let on, and now, as her voice crackled through the phone, she was speaking in riddles, dropping hints that made it all feel like a game. "You've been following a trail, Lucas. But you've missed the most important part. The real truth is right in front of you, but you're too close to see it." The more Lucas tried to pry, the more the tension in Claire's tone deepened. She hesitated before adding, "Mark's not the person you think he is. Neither is Ethan. Neither am I." Her voice quivered for a split second before she hung up. Those words echoed in his head like a haunting refrain. Everything Lucas had believed about his investigation, his trusted allies, and even his brother had been a lie. He had been searching for the wrong things, chasing shadows while the real danger had been hiding in plain sight. Mark, Ethan, and Claire, all of them had been playing a game, but not one Lucas had been included in. He was the last to realize that he had been nothing more than a pawn in a much larger scheme. In a frenzy, Lucas pulled out his old journal, flipping through the pages in search of anything that might give him a clue, anything he could use to connect the dots. That's when he found a note, hastily scribbled, almost overlooked during the early days of the investigation. It was from Ethan. The handwriting was unmistakable. At first, it had seemed like a simple message of reassurance, a line that Lucas had missed in the chaos. But reading it now, the meaning behind the words took on an entirely different, more chilling tone. "It's all connected. They've been watching you. I'm sorry." It was a confession, but not one of guilt. It was a warning. Lucas's mind raced as he tried to process it. Ethan wasn't just a victim in all of this. He had been involved, perhaps even orchestrating the events from the shadows. The implication was unbearable. But what had Ethan meant by "it's all connected"? Was it possible that everyone Lucas had trusted had been part of something bigger than him? Could the mystery of the vanishing stars be part of an even more intricate web of secrets and lies that no one had foreseen? What if the disappearance of these individuals wasn't random at all? What if they were deliberately erased to cover up something far more sinister? The truth hit Lucas with the force of a tidal wave. The investigation wasn't about solving a crime. It was about surviving the consequences of uncovering something too dangerous to confront. He wasn't supposed to know. He wasn't supposed to see what had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. Suddenly, the pieces fell into place, but not in the way he expected. He thought he had been uncovering a conspiracy, a cover-up that would explain the vanishing stars, but what he didn't realize was that the real conspiracy was about him. He was being set up, manipulated by the very people who should have been on his side. Everyone had been playing a part, his allies, his brother, even Claire. They had all been leading him down a path, feeding him half-truths, making him believe he was on the verge of something monumental, when in reality, they had been slowly steering him toward an inescapable trap. As the weight of this new truth sank in, Lucas was left with one unbearable question. Who could he trust now? What had he been blind to all along? And as the mystery continued to twist and shift beneath him, Lucas realized that he wasn't just chasing a story. He was running from a shadow that was closing in, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed him entirely. The weight of the decisions pressing on Lucas was almost too much to bear. The air seemed heavier with every passing moment, thick with the tension of a reality he couldn't escape. He had never anticipated that uncovering the truth would force him to face a series of impossible choices, each one more agonizing than the last. With every new revelation, the walls seemed to close in tighter, suffocating him as the stakes grew higher. He wasn't just unmasking the secrets of those around him. He was becoming entangled in a web that was designed to trap him, to force him into a corner from which there was no easy escape. The path forward was no longer just about solving a mystery. It was about survival, and with every twist, Lucas found himself teetering closer to a precipice. It wasn't long before the confrontation came. As much as Lucas had hoped to avoid it, there was no escaping the truth any longer. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The growing web of lies was unraveling faster than he could keep up with, and it all led back to one person, Claire. She had been his ally, his confidant, someone he trusted implicitly, but now, as the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together, Lucas could no longer ignore the nagging feeling that she was not what she appeared to be. It was clear now that Claire had known more about Ethan's disappearance than she had ever let on, and the message she had left him earlier only confirmed what he had feared. She was hiding something. He couldn't let her silence him anymore. The stakes were too high, and every second counted. If she had any answers, he had to pry them out of her, no matter the cost. That evening, Lucas showed up at Claire's apartment, his heart pounding in his chest. He had rehearsed the confrontation in his mind 1,000 times, but now that the moment had arrived, he found himself paralyzed, unsure of how to begin. When she opened the door, her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, those eyes that had once comforted him, now held a cold, distant edge. Without a word, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. There was an unspoken understanding between them, the tension in the air palpable, thick with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. They both knew why he was there. "Lucas," she said, her voice softer than usual, but there was a tightness in her tone that he hadn't missed. "I was wondering when you'd figured out." Her words were like a knife to his chest, cutting through any remnants of trust he had left. "You've been chasing shadows, Lucas. You've been running after the wrong answers. You don't understand the real danger here." She moved past him, not looking him in the eye as she poured herself a drink, the glass clinking as it met the counter. "It's not just about Ethan or Mark. It's bigger than that. Much bigger." Lucas's anger flared, hot and uncontrollable. "What the hell are you talking about, Claire? I'm the one who's been in the dark here. You knew what was happening, and you kept me in the dark."
Why?
"Why did you lie to me?" His voice cracked with desperation, the emotions he had been burying for so long finally spilling over. "You knew about Ethan. You knew about everything, and you didn't tell me. Why?" Claire's face softened for just a moment, as though she were about to say something that might make it all make sense, but then she closed herself off again, her walls going back up. She took a deep breath and set the glass down slowly. "You don't get it, Lucas. You don't know the full picture. You never will. You think you're doing the right thing, chasing after the truth, but the truth is it's a lie. A carefully crafted lie." Her words hung in the air like a weight, dragging Lucas further into confusion. His mind raced. A lie? What the hell does that mean? He took a step closer to her, ignoring the voice inside that told him to walk away, to let it go. But he couldn't. Not now, not when everything was falling apart. Claire turned to face him, her eyes hard now, filled with something Lucas had never seen before. Fear. Real, palpable fear. "There are things you don't understand. People you don't know. They're watching, Lucas. They've been watching both of us. And if you keep digging, you won't just lose Ethan. You'll lose everything." She paused, looking away as if she couldn't bear to face him. "And the worst part is, you won't even know who to trust when it's over. Not even me." Her voice cracked at the last sentence, and for a split second, Lucas saw the vulnerability he had always known in her, the woman he thought he could rely on. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by a coldness that he couldn't ignore. Lucas stood there, his thoughts spinning. He didn't know whether to be angry, betrayed, or terrified. "So, what? You're telling me I should just stop? Walk away from everything? You think I can just leave Ethan and walk away from this? That's not who I am, Claire." He was breathing hard now, his frustration boiling over. "Maybe that's exactly what you need to do," she said quietly. "Because the alternative is worse than you can imagine." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She handed it to him, without saying a word. Lucas took it, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded it. It was a single sentence. "You're not safe anymore." He looked up at her, confused and shaken. "What is this?" Claire looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time, Lucas saw the fear, raw and unfiltered, in her eyes. "That's the warning," she said. "You can't outrun this, Lucas. If you don't stop, you're going to lose more than just Ethan. You'll lose everything you ever cared about, and you'll be alone." The words hung in the air like a guillotine ready to fall. Lucas felt the crushing weight of them settle over him, and for a moment, he could hardly breathe. He was stuck in a nightmare he couldn't escape, forced to choose between the truth and his own safety. As the silence stretched between them, the uncertainty gnawed at him. Was Claire trying to protect him, or was she part of the conspiracy he was too deep in to escape? And if she was right, if the danger was this real, could he really just walk away, knowing that the truth would slip through his fingers forever? He had no answers, only questions, and with every step closer to the truth, it seemed like there was less and less to trust. Everything, his brother, his allies, the investigation, had become one huge, tangled mess. And now, the hardest choice of all lay before him. Would he risk it all for the truth? Or would he turn away, abandoning the investigation to save himself and those he loved? The clock was ticking, and no matter what decision he made, Lucas knew there was no going back. The weight of Claire's warning lingered in Lucas's mind, but the urgency in her voice couldn't overpower the fire that was building inside him. He couldn't walk away, not when so many pieces of the puzzle were still missing. As much as he tried to push aside the fear that gnawed at him, he knew that the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. Every step he had taken, every question he had asked, had pulled him deeper into a conspiracy far beyond anything he could have anticipated. The deeper he dug, the more it seemed like the people he trusted, the people he had leaned on, were no longer on his side. And the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. Lucas could no longer ignore the signs. Claire's warning, the strange disappearances, the cryptic messages, the people who seemed to be watching his every move, it was all part of something much larger than a simple investigation into his brother's disappearance. It wasn't just Ethan anymore. It wasn't just about finding one person lost in the shadows. The conspiracy was much more extensive, its tendrils stretching into places Lucas hadn't even thought to look. He had been a pawn in a much bigger game, and the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been used, and worse, he had unknowingly helped to fuel the very thing that threatened to destroy everything he held dear. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his spiraling thoughts. The message was simple, but the words were enough to send a chill down his spine. "They know you're getting close. Stop now, or everyone will pay the price." It was signed with a name he recognized, Tommy, one of the last people Lucas would have suspected to be involved. Tommy had been with him from the start, a friend, a source of support, someone who had helped him through the worst of the investigation. Or so Lucas had thought. Now, with this message, the truth was undeniable. Tommy had been playing him from the beginning. The realization hit like a tidal wave, crashing over him with a suffocating force. He couldn't believe it. Tommy, the one person who had seemed like a safe ally, had been working against him all along. But what was worse was that this wasn't just about one person betraying another. It wasn't just about Lucas being deceived. It was about the massive scope of the conspiracy he had inadvertently become a part of. There were more people involved in this than he could have ever imagined, and the deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. Tommy's message wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. A final, desperate attempt to stop him from uncovering the truth. And the worst part? The more Lucas thought about it, the more he realized that this was only the beginning. There were more people, more pieces of the puzzle to uncover, and the more he uncovered, the more ruthless the people behind this conspiracy would become. In that moment, Lucas understood that he wasn't just fighting for answers anymore. He was fighting for his life. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and the fear that had once only been a quiet whisper now screamed at him, louder with every step he took toward the truth. He couldn't trust anyone, not Claire, not Tommy, not even himself. Every person in his life had a motive, and every revelation he uncovered only led to more questions. But he couldn't stop. He had to know. He had to understand what was happening, even if it meant losing everything in the process. He needed to find Tommy. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Lucas wasted no time. He grabbed his jacket, his heart pounding in his chest, and made his way out of Claire's apartment. His mind was racing as he thought through the possible locations Tommy might be hiding. It was clear that Tommy had been a part of this conspiracy from the start, but what exactly was his role? Was he just a pawn like Lucas, or was he something more? As the minutes ticked by, Lucas felt the weight of the situation closing in around him. It was as if the very walls were closing in, and with every step, he could feel the pressure building. He had to get to Tommy before it was too late. But the closer he got, the more it became clear that Tommy wasn't just a simple player in this game. He was a key figure. And if Lucas didn't find him first, he might not live to uncover the full truth. His phone buzzed again. It was another message from Tommy, and this one was even more cryptic than the last. "You're running out of time. They're already here. They know you're coming." Lucas's heart skipped a beat as the meaning behind those words sank in. They were watching him. Tommy wasn't just warning him about the people Lucas had already uncovered. He was warning him about something much bigger. The deeper Lucas went, the more the shadowy figures behind the conspiracy grew. This was no longer just about Ethan's disappearance. This was about something far more insidious, something that had been carefully orchestrated behind closed doors. With each step, the danger grew closer. Every corner Lucas turned, he felt eyes on him. Every phone call, every message, every encounter felt like it could be his last. He couldn't trust anyone, least of all Tommy, who had been the one person Lucas had believed he could count on. The realization of the scale of the conspiracy, the magnitude of the betrayal, made his head spin. He was no longer in control of the situation. In fact, he had never truly been in control. He was just another pawn, a player in a game that was far beyond his understanding. But there was no turning back now. He was already too deep. If he stopped now, he would never know the truth. And with the clock ticking down, Lucas had to make a choice. Keep pushing forward into the unknown, or turn back and risk losing everything. The stakes were higher than ever, and with each passing moment, the danger grew. The conspiracy was vast, and it was coming for him. The only question left was whether he could survive long enough to expose it. Lucas could feel his breath coming faster as he stood in front of the dilapidated warehouse, his hand clutching the cold metal of the door handle. The air was thick with tension, every sense in his body on high alert. He had been chasing shadows for so long, but now, in this moment, everything was about to come together. Every twist, every turn, every betrayal, it had all led to this place. The phone calls, the threats, the cryptic messages, the whispers of a conspiracy so vast that it could swallow everything in its path. It was all real. And now, he was here, standing on the edge of the truth. His mind raced as he thought of everything that had led him here. The pieces of the puzzle that had been scattered across his life were finally starting to form a complete picture, one that he wasn't sure he was ready to see. Tommy's betrayal had been the first domino to fall, but it had triggered a cascade of revelations that had rocked Lucas's world. His brother's disappearance wasn't just a tragic event, it was part of a much larger plan, one that stretched across cities and institutions. People he had trusted had been lying to him from the beginning, and now, standing on the cusp of the truth, Lucas felt a rising sense of dread. What if the truth was more than he could bear? He pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges echoing through the empty space. Inside, the shadows seemed to stretch out, as if they were waiting for him, drawing him deeper into the heart of the mystery. He could hear footsteps ahead, low and steady, but there was no sign of the person he expected. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved further in, the silence pressing against him like a weight. And then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It was Tommy. But this wasn't the Tommy Lucas knew. The man who stood before him was colder, harder, his eyes dark and unrecognizable. The friendly, supportive ally Lucas had once trusted was now nothing more than a stranger, a man with a secret so deep it had consumed everything. Tommy's lips curled into a tight, humorless smile as he took a step forward, his presence overwhelming. "You shouldn't have come here, Lucas." Tommy's voice was low, almost a growl, as if every word had been carefully calculated. "You've dug too deep. You can't stop this now." Lucas felt his stomach churn, the realization that Tommy had been a part of everything hitting him like a punch. The man he had relied on, the one person he had believed to be on his side, had been orchestrating this all along.
But why?
What had driven Tommy to betray him like this? What was the ultimate goal?
Why?
Lucas's voice cracked, a mixture of anger and confusion. Why all of this? Why make me part of this madness? Tommy's smile faded, replaced by something darker. "You don't get it, do you?" He took another step, his eyes never leaving Lucas. "It was never about you, Lucas. It was about control. It's always been about control. The people behind this." Before Tommy could finish, the lights in the warehouse flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. A sudden chill filled the air, and Lucas froze, his pulse quickening as the realization hit him.
There were more people involved.
The conspiracy he had been so focused on wasn't just a local operation, it was far bigger than that. And now it was closing in on him. Tommy's eyes flicked to the shadows behind Lucas, and in that instant, Lucas understood. He wasn't alone. The walls of the warehouse were lined with figures, people Lucas didn't recognize. But they were watching him, waiting. His heart pounded in his chest as the weight of the situation crashed down on him. This was it. The final confrontation. But the more he tried to make sense of it, the more he realized that everything he thought he knew was wrong. "You've been a pawn, Lucas," Tommy continued, his voice cold and detached. "Just like everyone else. But you're too far gone now. They're not going to let you walk away. Not after everything you've uncovered." Lucas's mind raced as he processed the words.
They?
Who were they? He had thought it was just a few corrupt individuals, but now he realized it was a web that stretched far beyond his comprehension. This wasn't just about Ethan. This wasn't just about one person disappearing. This was a machine, a vast, shadowy organization that operated in the darkest corners of the world. "Who are they?" Lucas demanded, stepping closer. "Who's behind this?
What do they want?"
Tommy's lips twitched into a grimace. "You really think you're going to get an answer for me now?" His voice was almost mocking. "You've been asking the wrong questions. You're not meant to know everything, Lucas. Some truths are too dangerous." Suddenly, everything clicked. The puzzles, the connections, the subtle hints that had been dropped along the way, it all made sense now. Tommy wasn't just a part of this conspiracy. He was its puppet master. And Lucas? He had been played from the very beginning. But the real question now wasn't how it all fit together.
It was why.
What was the end game? What did Tommy stand to gain from all of this? Before Lucas could demand more answers, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind him. He spun around, heart leaping into his throat as he realized there were others entering the warehouse. People, all dressed in dark clothing, moving with purpose and precision. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with danger. "Time's up, Lucas," Tommy said, his voice quiet but filled with finality. "You should have stopped a long time ago." And then, just as the figures closed in on him, the world seemed to freeze. In that moment, everything went silent. The light flickered again, and a voice echoed from the shadows. "You should have trusted me." Claire stepped into the dim light, her eyes filled with an unreadable emotion. The woman Lucas thought had been his ally, the one person who had seemed to understand, was standing there, her gaze fixed on him, but her stance betrayed something else entirely. Lucas's stomach dropped. It wasn't just Tommy who had been playing him. It was Claire, too. "How long?" Lucas asked, barely able to keep the tremor out of his voice. Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the group of figures behind her and then back at Lucas, her eyes filled with regret. But it wasn't enough to make him trust her.
"Not now."
"Not after everything." "You don't have the full picture, Lucas," Claire said softly, her voice laced with something almost sad. "But soon you will." The hours that followed felt like a blur of confusion and betrayal as Lucas stood there, caught in the heart of a storm he had never expected. Claire's presence didn't offer any comfort. In fact, it only deepened the gnawing feeling in his gut that everything he had believed, every step he had taken, had been in vain. The pieces of the puzzle were finally in place, but they didn't offer the kind of clarity he had hoped for. Instead, they raised more questions, more doubts. Claire had been a part of it all along, just like Tommy, just like the shadowy figures that had come to collect him. They were part of a vast network, a force so elusive, so far-reaching that Lucas wasn't sure he would ever be able to untangle it. He had learned too much, seen too much, and now there was no way out. As he stood there, with the weight of their gaze pressing down on him, Lucas tried to make sense of everything. Claire's eyes were filled with something hard to decipher: pity, regret, or maybe just resignation. She had always been the one person in his life who had seemed to understand, who had been the only one to see the world through his eyes. But now, as the truth of her involvement came crashing down, Lucas could no longer find the comfort he had once drawn from her presence. She wasn't just another victim of this conspiracy. She was a willing participant, and that betrayal cut deeper than anything else he had encountered. "You've been part of this all along, haven't you?" Lucas's voice was thick with disbelief, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. Claire's lips parted as though she were about to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an explanation, but there was nothing left to say. The silence between them stretched on, thick and suffocating. Lucas felt the pull of every decision that had led him to this moment, each one a step further into a darkness he had never fully understood until now. He had thought that uncovering the truth would bring him peace, that solving the mystery would offer him some form of closure. But all it had done was tear apart the life he had known and left him with a fractured, uncertain future. Tommy, standing by Claire, didn't say a word.
He didn't need to.
His presence spoke volumes, and the look in his eyes was one of cold finality. There was no turning back now. The past was a labyrinth of lies, and now Lucas was standing at its center, uncertain whether the truth was even worth knowing. In the end, Lucas was faced with an impossible choice. The threat of his own life weighed heavy, and the consequences of his every action loomed large. But even as his world was shattering around him, something inside him hardened. He had lost everything: his brother, his trust in the people he had loved, his sense of self. But what he had gained was something far more profound. He now knew that the world wasn't just a collection of good and bad people. It was far more complicated, far more treacherous, and Lucas had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. As the figures around him closed in, Lucas took a deep breath, preparing himself for whatever came next. It wasn't the resolution he had wanted, but it was the only one he was going to get. The truth had come at a great cost, but it had also opened his eyes to something he couldn't ignore. The conspiracy was larger than he could ever have imagined, and there were more forces at play than he was ready to face. But for the first time in a long while, Lucas felt like he had a choice again. He didn't have to give up. He didn't have to surrender to the shadows that had consumed so many before him. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and the harsh daylight flooded in. As Lucas stepped outside, the weight of everything that had happened settled heavily on his shoulders. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, of conflicting emotions, of fear and uncertainty. But amidst the chaos, there was a flicker of resolve. He couldn't undo what had been done. He couldn't erase the pain or the betrayals, the lies or the hidden truths. But he could move forward, no matter how dark the road ahead seemed. As the wind swept past him, Lucas glanced back one last time. Claire and Tommy stood in the shadows, their figures barely visible against the fading light. A part of him wanted to scream, to demand answers, to force them to explain themselves. But another part, a quieter part, realized that no explanation would ever be enough. Some things were too far gone to fix. Some people too lost to save. With a final, reluctant glance at the ruins of his past, Lucas turned and walked away, the mystery of the vanishing stars still hanging in the air like a question with no answer. The conspiracy hadn't been solved, not in the way he had hoped. But it had been revealed, and now It was up to him to figure out what to do with that knowledge. And just before the screen faded to black, Lucas's phone buzzed. Another message, another piece of the puzzle. The words on the screen were simple, but the weight of them sent a chill through his bones. You think you've seen the end, but it's only the beginning. The truth, Lucas now understood, was far from over.